I'm just going to I will start out by, telling you guys a little bit of who I am, and the rest of the panelists will in turn do that. And then we'll jump into the questions. As Jake said, please put your, questions in the chat if need be. And then we should have some time at the end for, questions and insights from the rest of the audience. So a little bit about me. I am Adetoun Adeniji-Adele. I am the highway manager at Integral Molecular. I've been doing that for almost 3 years now. And Integral is a company that's been around for about 20 years right here in the Science Center area. We really love Philadelphia and the Philadelphia area. We're really committed to finding employees from the Philadelphia area and making sure to expand the scope of people that we bring into the company, especially in the last year or so, where we've seen the impact of this pandemic so much more on the more disadvantaged communities. And so we are, as a company, really trying to understand how best we can bring in a more diverse workforce and what that could mean for us in trying to make sure that we are actually that our workforce reflects the community in which we live and work. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob to introduce himself as well.
Thanks so much. Morning. Well, I guess it's sort of afternoon, everybody.
Yes.
My name is Bob Castellucci. I started Partnership to Prosperity about 1.5 years ago. And it's a company that's really dedicated to helping people get the skills they need to get a job and develop their professional career in whatever way makes sense for them. Prior to that, I spent almost 45 years in the pharma, biopharm, biotech industry, a number of different companies. I'm a construction guy, not a maintenance guy. So I've moved around a lot and had the opportunity to build a number of organizations. And certainly one of the things that I learned from that is, you can have all the greatest procedures, work processes, all the mechanics in the world. But in the end, if you don't have people with the right skills, the right capabilities in the right places at the right time, all those other things won't get you where you need to go. My last role in the industry was the head of quality for a rare disease company called Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And it was in that time that I experienced firsthand what I'm sure many of you were pre-pandemic, the underemployment problem. We just could not find enough people with the right skills. That led me to start to learn more and more about how is it that we in industry, educators know what people need to know. And I realized, yikes, we don't help them very much. And that plus being in Philadelphia and seeing all the great stuff that was happening here, with the exception, huge exception of the, to me, unacceptably high rate of poverty and its direct connection to access to quality education that gives you skills. That's what led me to do what I'm doing now. I'm just happy to be here. I really look forward to a great conversation. Thanks so much.
All right, so Edison, if you want to continue. You're muted.
Thank you. I was so enthralled by what Bob was saying. I forgot to unmute myself. Good afternoon. My name is Edison Freire. I'm a part of JEVS Human Services, which is a multi-sector diversified human services provider. A little bit about the agency and then how I fit into it. JEVS manages over 30 programs serving about 20,000 people and individuals in the areas of in-home care, addiction recovery, community supports, and adult residential, and workforce development, and additional other services. Within this area, we manage CareerLink, and that has over 30 job developers supporting employer talent development. In my position as the director of Gateway Strategies, we're kind of sort of trying to answer the question that Bob said, which is like, how do we ensure that employers are getting the right job seeker, that matches their need. And we know that this is a very complex issue that we're trying to address. So we're looking at how do we create that entry point, that gateway to a future opportunity that can lead to career pathways, career ladders, and how do we best leverage public workforce investments with private sector investments that also drive at changes in policies, especially since we've been living this pandemic and we see these gaps that need to be addressed to ensure that we are developing a much more robust, diverse talent pipeline for the industry.
Great. And Phil.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phil Brooks. I am the Director of STEM Workforce Partnerships at the University City Science Center. University City Science Center has been around for 50 plus years. The Science Center has three major pillars: commercialization, convening, and cultivate. We do a lot within those pillars, many programs, many different departments, all with the purpose of increasing economic development within the greater Philadelphia area, bringing people together, being able to service them in a way that moves them forward in a way that's impactful. I specifically focus on workforce development, and as of April of 2019, joined the Science Center team to really focus on connecting community, young adults and adults, to the STEM and the ever-growing landscape that is life science and the technology kind of industry. Currently, there are lots of opportunities for a lot of different people, but our audience is really focused on folks from the community that may have had some life situation or have gone to a four-year college and weren't able to finish. We really try to focus on this audience primarily because it's really important. And they're incredibly intelligent people. So what we try to do is we work with different partners and really connect what we do on an everyday basis with our strong relationships with the life science community and literally build that bridge to the West Philadelphia community. So I'm excited to be on this panel. I can't wait to hear what the other panelists have to say, as well as some of the other guests on the call. But I'm definitely looking forward to a rich conversation.
Great. So, it seems that all of you are really involved in this kind of trying to understand how to bridge gaps between what employers need and what's out there in the workforce, as well as, what's, public and private and how those two can come together. I think that was actually a really interesting point that we could start is, what is it that's potentially holding employers and educators back from really collaborating with employees in order to develop and prepare people for, the real jobs and real work. We can start with you, Bob, since you're the one that's, talked a little bit about that right at the beginning.
Sure. So I would say that, or I'd start by saying, until I actually made myself really think about why isn't this, meaning recruiting to find the right people, why isn't it working? I actually didn't realize what I, as an employer, as a hiring manager, needed to do to define the target. What is it that I'm looking for? I just wasn't doing enough. And I think that, at least in my case, was because it's much easier to just go to a list of competencies and check the boxes than it is to actually think about what those things look like. So for the employer, I think the thing that holds us back is it's kind of hard work that we don't imagine as part of the productive work we do every day. It's not that people don't care about it, but it's not top of mind. We don't see the direct value as an employer. For educators, what I've learned is that there's a long legacy connected to the way the educational system is designed today. And a lot of the focus has been on what I would call the scholarly side. And what now needs to happen is to sort of bring the scholarly knowledge to the practical world. So for particularly faculty members, helping them feel confident that doing education in a way that's work and result based is not abandoning the scholarly world that they're used to. It's just bringing it to a more practical setting. So those are two things, I guess, that I would offer up front that were part of my experience. There's a ton we can talk about, but
Great.
that's just a starter, I guess.
Sure, Edison, we'd like to hear your thoughts on that same kind of that same topic. You still muted?
Yep, nope, yeah, this, sure. Piggybacking on what Bob said, I think that employers are more and more realizing that, you know, the requirement of a college degree for positions that don't necessarily need a candidate to have spent four more years, as well as accumulated thousands of dollars of debt, is really meeting their needs. And so part of what we're saying is that Bob says, like, the mindset is really say employers need to think, who do I need? What are the skill sets that the job requires? And honestly, I think the last year of not just the pandemic experience, but the sort of awareness of what it will take to address race, equity, and inclusion puts us at a different level of understanding, responsibility, and advocacy, and action. So I think it's very clear, the research shows that degree requirements can keep skilled and talented workers out of certain positions. And so that makes it very hard to create a diversified and inclusive workplace for companies. So between the knowledge that degrees may be the sort of the low-hanging fruit and easy way to attract talent, but not necessarily meet the skills that the employer needs. And this knowledge really stresses the need for employers to be thinking, I need to craft a smarter talent strategy plan that looks at, and I think this is what I'm hearing from employers, the employees' critical digital and cognitive capabilities. How might we improve those? Their social emotional skills because of the stress and trauma that we lived, and their adaptability and resilience that they need to do the job. So as you can tell, none of this related to the degree. It was really about the skills and the sort of the qualities that a company needs so that they can sort of build the workforce they need and require. So I'm hopeful, and I'm hearing that the mindset is that companies need to double down on their training and learning budgets and how they acquire talent and commit to reskilling and developing the mental muscle to strengthen their companies in how they tap into talent pipelines and build their workforce.
Right. So, Phil, your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So collaboration has always been at the top of my list. For folks on the call that know me, in my time with nonprofit organizations and my time with city government, collaboration has always been at the top of my list. And I think I just personally have been frustrated with some lack of collaboration or hesitation of collaboration because of like the one track way of thinking for such a long time. I think now more than ever, we have to continually to like radically think about how we move forward, how we change things, just like even the topic of this discussion, like reimagining. Potentially that word has been put out a lot, but what does that mean? Both Bob and Edison hit on a number of amazing points. I myself am not, a CEO of a company, but at the same time, if I were, what I'd really try to do is, one, I would, prioritize things. I want to focus on capital. I want to be able to keep the lights on and keep my people, here working for me, et cetera. As I grow my organization, I know that I'm going to need individuals with varying skill levels to do certain tasks, whether it's administrative, accounting, executive assistants, all of the above. And what I think is really important is that, we continue to, we'll see the success of one company, or I'll see the success of my, fellow company over here and say, oh, let me try that. But I, as a company, would be fearful to try something myself if I don't think I'm going to meet with the same amount of success or success at all. That's taking a risk that I think is really, really, that's reality. It's a real thing. However, on the opposite side of the coin, if you jump into, community members and leaders and organizations, in my experience, just my personal experience and talking with community leaders and members, they have an appetite for this type of industry. They have an appetite to be reskilled. And these are folks that are coming from years of work in other industries. So you have this really, really rich amount of industry knowledge in different industries that can be extremely valuable to companies and organizations. Although, as I mentioned at the very beginning of my short speech, is that the fear is there of not wanting to take the risk, not wanting to be the first one to do something. And then if you do see someone be the first to do something, it's okay, let me try this. Let me do this. Again, I can only imagine what folks at the top level has to go through. And I don't want to be ignorant to the fact that there are certain degrees necessary for certain roles. But there is a really, really big vital component to collaboration, both from the educator side and the company side. That is just, it's critical. It's consistently critical. And it needs to be pushed even further. It needs to be in more conversations. It needs to be, at more tables of discussion, and folks from both sides, from community side, from educator side to company side, all need to be at the table to have these conversations. It can't be one-sided.
Right. So I think that.
Can I just tag on to that for a second? I think, Phil, what you're getting at is, what's the burning platform? What I think is gosh, I don't know, ironic, hard to imagine, is that, especially as I think about it from an executive point of view, a CEO just recently said to me, Bob, everything you're saying makes so much sense, but certainly in the days of the pandemic, as he put it, it's really hard for me to think about building a front porch when my house is burning. So I think part of what we as professionals that are really trying to help all of those stakeholders, job seekers, educators, and employers, it's up to us to help them actually see what that burning platform is, because it just isn't that obvious until you get it. Then when you do get it, it's like, oh my gosh, how did I not see this? So I think that's something that we can kind of take to real life as a really important part of our responsibility and our contribution.
So where then do those platforms to make companies see the value? How do you start to establish those, right? So Edison, you talked a little bit a while ago about these private and public partnerships. How do we start to do that so that companies can see the value, as Phil was talking about, and then as Bob was talking about, how do I build, how do I take care of building that the porch while the house is burning? How do we do that for these employers to see the value and educators to see the value?
Sure. I think, Phil kind of positioned this sort of situation where it's a risk reward sort of situation. So how, where in that sort of continuum do I find myself? And the argument, I think, is that there's a lot more reward than risk right now to be disruptive and innovative and take the plunge. Because what is the alternative? Really, we can't go back to the same old system that we may have thought of worked, and we would argue did not work prior to the pandemic. So we see this as an opportunity to say, okay, internally, companies reflecting what's our strategy for talent development internally, but also to ask yourself that question: how might we partner with others doing this work, and how might we have collaborative approaches to responding to this issue? So it boils down to the notion that in our space, in many ways, we are all competitors for talent development, quality talent development, but also we see the need to collaborate to expand that pool of potential talent that we can tap into. So I would argue that that's where we need to be at right now, which is competition is good, but let's ensure that that competition enhances the opportunities for many more to join this, the recovery that we know is going to happen. So in terms of public and private, let me just say that, as part of our strategy at JEVS is sort of looking at the view of all the stakeholders, whether it's the employer, the job seeker, and the investments that are made to make the marriage between a job seeker and the employer, all customers of the system. So we've been looking at how might we use a tried and true model, the apprenticeship model, to ensure that we identify a job seeker and provide the supports to both their success in the training and to the employer to ensure success in retention and growth. The other piece that we're looking at is holistically, how does that become an infrastructure? How does other agencies doing this work sort of support holistically the employer base? So I'm going to throw out something here, and I'll have a chance to write out. With the Philadelphia Workforce Board, we're sustaining this platform called Apprenticeship PHL, which is the go-to place where you want, if any employer is looking for resources and ways to look at this model for addressing this sort of need to build a public-private system of investments. The other piece, very quickly, is that Philadelphia Youth Network is a good intermediary that does a lot of great work with exposing young adults to quality contextualized learning experiences. So we're working with PYN as the convener to really work with employers, and I'm reaching out to any employer here who may want to sit down with us and figure out what is the assessments that we need to do, both on the training side and on the entry-level side for employers, to take the risk to think about hiring our most vulnerable population right now, which is Philadelphia young adults. And talking about Bob's sort of reminder, our poverty level is so high because we are not doing a good job at breaking the cycle of poverty. And part of that is really providing meaningful on-ramps for young adults. So we're looking for employers who may want to look at it and say, I'm committed to supporting this workforce pipeline of young adults. How might we work together to figure out an assessment of how we do the training, how we onboard, and how do we retain that talent pool? I'll add some more details, but I want to hand it over to Bob for some follow-up.
Yeah, so Bob, actually, so Edison mentioned a couple of programs that he's involved with. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is that one of your passion projects that you think will really get us to this public-private partnership conversation?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with something that somebody told me a long time ago. I guess is many of you guys have heard this same thing, that there's a reason that you have one of these and two of these. I think where so much of the work starts with is actually creating the environment that allows people, whether they're employers, educators, or job seekers, in a position where they can actually express what it is that they're looking for. And the more, even though it sounds like such an insanely simple thought, it just really kind of amazes me how hard it is for us to really persistently do that. Ask those key questions and then really listen hard at the answers. Edison mentioned, right, the demographic of the job seeker in 2021 is so incredibly different than it ever has been in the past. So a really important part of what I'm trying to do with some fairly large universities as well as smaller schools is kind of compare what it is that people look for as learners that matches their real life situation with the programs and the curricula and the structure of education today. And when you just really just ask the question and listen to the answers, you start seeing this huge disconnect between what people could afford, what they could make work logistically in their real life. And I want to go back to something, I think it was that Edison said, you know, what really requires a 4-year degree or not? So, you know, part one of my answer is, you know, regardless of who we're working with, we try really hard to ask not a million questions, but the 2 or 3 really key questions, and then zip it, you know, and really learn from those people so that whatever we wind up building is built to suit, you know, it's fit for purpose.
Right.
Um,
So I think, Phil, you've, been working at the Science Center, that you have a lot of experience with, developing these kinds of programs for people who might not have that college degree, but are really very interested in the STEM fields.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of my professional career has really worked with STEM youth and connecting them with opportunities, exposure opportunities, getting students to manufacturing sites or locations, or having those companies come to the students. But I was in a unique position with the Science Center to really adapt that, not just for young adults, but for adults as well. And that kind of like opened the door for me to really understand what's going on. So I spent a large majority of my first several months with the Science Center talking with community organizations, sitting in barbershops, talking with CEOs of life science companies, talking with tech providers and tech companies. And I really, like, for me as Phil Brooks and trying to do my job really well, tried to spend as much time like listening to folks, right? My job really is focused on making this bridge. But if I'm only building a bridge from one side, and the folks on the other side of the river, I guess, so to speak, don't care about it or don't want it, why am I building the bridge? Right. So that was a question that was posed to me several months into my role. And I really, really had to like think critically about that and build out a program and like bring on professionals that's been doing this work for a really long time. So I've had lots of conversations with the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative. They have a program, they have a structure in place that gets people jobs. I had lots of conversations with Eclose Institute. They train and work with adults directly in a research, in a kind of like environment that really focuses on making sure they know what they're doing. We spoke with CEO Council for Growth, Eclose Institute, eCouncil Solutions. And I spoke with all of these folks really to begin to understand what my role is. And it's both rewarding and frustrating at the same time, having these conversations, seeing where people stand, both from a community and company side, but being able, and I'm really proud of this, I have to say for myself, I'm really proud of what we built so far, because at the core of everything that we're trying to do, we want to get the company involved on all different levels. So mentorship is a huge part of this. Being able to serve as a selection committee member, we reached out into the life science community, and I said, hey, folks from the life science community, I need for you to review these applications of folks who are interested in our program, and you let us know, right? You let us know if you would take this person on if certain conditions were correct, right? And then we've had guest speakers like Adetoun came on and talked to us about, HR as it relates to integral molecular, and being able to expose not just the adults to these opportunities, but ultimately the ultimate goal is to get these folks hired. I can't say it enough that there's programs and upon programs, which are a lot of them are amazing, but being able to connect folks to employment is super critical, and being able to think outside the box. I know that statement is said a lot. Being able to think outside the box is too important right now. And having conversations, we're having a conversation right now, which is great. But Edison said this, and Bob said this too. The action part is super important at this point. We have to put, our money where our mouth is. We have to be able to say, here is a way for us to do something to move on to an individual being prosperous, not just in their community, not just to do something like sympathy wise. Oh, like the people from the community, I'll pour them. No. No. These people are extraordinarily intelligent and can definitely fill some of the roles at these companies. I'll stop there because I feel myself getting hype.
Right. So I think you started talking a little bit about that. Is like, you know, how does, when you have, you know, created or have these positions for these people, how then does, you know, does that impact the workforce? And then how does that impact the society in which they live, right? So it impacts like the socioeconomic equity that we are all, I think, part of what we're talking about today, right? We can start with you, Bob, if you want to start with an answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think just as a context, I think probably many people on the call have heard the expression, right, that business is a social institution. It sounds great. Again, it's a nice little sound bite, but you know, I think I guess what I've found is that what the way that becomes real is if I think about what would I have to do as an employer to solve my need for talent. And then I take that hat off and I think if I were the mayor of a large city of maybe about 6 million people, if you can think of one like that, oh, that's us. What would I have to do to improve the social equity and justice gaps that we have today? The unbelievable great thing is the answer to both of those questions is the same thing. Help people get access to the know-how that they need to be able to get a job and do a good job at it, and then develop themselves from there. So, you know, when I think about what that looks like in real life, you know, it's a lot of the things we've been talking about. It starts with skills. So a really important part of the work that I believe we need to start with, especially with employers, is really being able to map out what are those skills that are critical to the professions that you seek people from. And then based on the jobs that you have, what do they need to have mastered? Edwin said, not every job requires a 4-year degree. I couldn't agree more. As the head of quality in a couple of different pharmaceutical and biotech companies, highly regulated space, the norm was always you have to have a bachelor's to get a job in pharma. I'm, I guess, a little bit of a glass breaker, and it was pretty obvious to me that that was not true, but you do have to have some skills. So start with skills, create those domain maps, use those maps to show people what are the pathways, whether it's the learning pathway or the career pathway that looks appealing to you, so that they can understand what they have to do. What do they have? What know-how do they have to gain to be able to achieve what they're trying to? So in the end, as I said, whether you're the employer, the educator, or the job seeker, the answer is the same. It's a threefer. So identify the skills, work together to develop programs that absolutely, we underuse apprenticeships so badly. Mm-hmm. that allow people to learn by doing. People learn much better when their classroom knowledge is complemented with experiential learning. Mm-hmm. And then make sure that the people that we're putting through programs, that we've designed them to include mentors, coaches, advocates, so that the people who don't naturally have them in their environment have people, you know, that have their back.
Absolutely. So Edison, I think that's one of the things that you're doing with a lot of your programs, right? Is this kind of, I think we talked a little bit about that when we first met, is this apprenticeship idea, and using apprenticeships in a way that facilitates these, not necessarily having the educational background, but having the skill sets and the capabilities to actually do the job that is needed. So can you talk a little bit about that from your context?
Sure. So JEVS is an intermediary right now in 3 areas for apprenticeships. We're trying to grow in IT, entry-level technical support, as well as moving with one of our partners, Resilient Coders, in developing a full stack developer apprenticeship. Work with Einstein and a couple other health networks in building allied health career apprenticeships, particularly right now in medical assistance, as well nurses aid and community health worker. And the last one is in advanced manufacturing. We know we're going to have to onshore a lot of our manufacturing processes, and we support small to medium size companies in the area that just need to find talent. What's common across all these areas is that we're working with employers that have identified the need for a certain skill set that they're not getting from the traditional educational training programs. So one, it's really building to spec for the employer what the talent pipeline they need. But second, and having these often difficult but honest conversations about why this is also an opportunity to diversify their workforce. So like looking at the two sides of the coin, about diversity. Diversity is not only, has the social impact and is good for the company, but the flip side to that coin is that research has shown, it often breeds innovation. Diversity of thought, the diversity of representation creates that opportunity. So that's kind of how we're using this apprenticeship model. But then beyond that is that's informing the training programs that we're working with that prepare job seekers for that pipeline. So thinking of that long continuum, even to K-12 systems, as well to other training programs. So for example, we're looking at our clients in our Work Ready program. That's the program that supports folks who are on public assistance in the training and the employment preparation, looking at this very holistically. How do we support a family, the intergenerational need of supporting the student and the parent to build what we're calling family lifelong learning culture. So this notion of we also need to reskill that way, because as the student sees the parent working towards their employment and preparing for employment, it needs to build that way. So in that context, we're also looking at what are the systems we need to put in place to ensure this lifelong avocation to learning. So addressing digital inclusion is really key, because now we're thinking of what does it take to learn, to become a lifelong learner. It means that you have to have on-demand opportunities to access education, alternative ways to education, as well as the formal system. But a lot of that has to do with the infrastructure that we have access to, that often we take for granted, which is bandwidth, access to devices, access to tech support, as well as really coming to an understanding of what are the digital literacy skills that need to be sort of the foundation that we build from. So as you can see, I added on, I kind of answer a much more expansive conversation about how our work with an employer really informs the pipeline sort of continuum to the younger generation, which then the question is, how are we also changing how we educate from K to 12 that then aligns to workforce, but also the post-secondary educational opportunities we just discussed.
Absolutely. So I think you have something to add along this line, Phil, because I know that the Bulb program, right, this past year had someone who experienced something that along the lines that Edison's talking about that was unexpected. So would you like to comment on that?
I would love to comment on that. Thank you for teeing that up so beautifully for me. So we ran our program over the summer with the full intention of having this be in person. It was a 2-week program. We really wanted to focus on the basics of laboratory environment and skills needed for potentially a lab assistant or technician would these skills specifically be necessary for a person to walk into a lab tomorrow? No, but we want to be able to help them understand these skills and give them materials. So we sent materials to their homes. We were able to bring on instructors that have a ton of knowledge within the research and lab community. So after that 2 weeks was over, 3 hours a day, it was an amazing experience. All 12 of the members stay in contact with us, and we send them resources, etc. Integral Molecular, as amazing as the partners as they are with our firsthand program, which is our youth STEM program, and our workforce program, reached out to us and said, we want to scoop somebody up for a paid internship opportunity. So that paid internship opportunity happened over the month of October. And again, it's something that we didn't anticipate. The purpose of the program was to continue to connect people, or to try and connect people to the life science industry, with the ultimate goal of having folks being hired. I will be the first to say we are not there yet. Like, we just started last year, and there is a good amount of validity and experience and knowledge and things of that nature. But we were able to have one of our participants for our program spend a month at Integral Molecular, their labs, and she was there as potentially like a person who was onboarded, a person who would be onboarded. And I think I'm kind of jealous of that experience for her, just because I'm a science geek myself. But at the end of the day, that's what we want to move towards. We want to move to opportunities of that nature. We want to move to internships. We want to move to eventually apprenticeships. Ultimately, again, it's my sole goal to make sure folks are being hired, part-time, full-time, whatever. I think at the end of the day, folks just want to be able to be included, and they want to be able to walk into the door into a culture that is the life science industry and feel welcomed and know that they're getting paid for it, right? Know that they are having a really, really strong connection to this growing industry in the region. And as we continue, as other companies start to plant their flags in the region, again, it's going to be really important to be able to tell this type of story and say, hey, these individuals had these opportunities because they participated in these types of programs, right?
There was one story. Sorry, but Phil, there was one story with Janelle, I think is who you're talking about. You know, how even when she was training, her son was also training with her. So to talk about that a little bit,
Yep.
because I think that ties with that kind of intergenerational thing that Edison was talking about, right?
Exactly. Yep. And Edison pointed this out, and he teed it up beautifully as well. Like, the lifelong learning component to this is also really critical. So during the entire 2 weeks of the process, the instructors and I would have kind of like powwows before and after the session. And we would see Jonelle's camera, and she would always like look off into the distance. So we finally asked her, who were you looking at, these past 2 weeks? She had her son in the room with her, learning all the protocols that we were going over. Not just like sitting there, like just doing the things herself, but I would even go as far as to say she had her son doing the protocols even after the camera turned off. That to me was amazing. As a parent myself, I would make my kids do scientific stuff all the time. That's just me as an individual. But from a company level, from a person, from a CEO level, like being able to understand that this individual has not only like their own kind of like thoughts and benefits and welfare in mind, that they want to spread this out to the rest of the community, that creates your talent. That creates your talent for later on down the line. You may be a company right now, you're not ready for bringing on individuals at different education levels. However, individuals going through these programs right now and passing that information along to their children and young people is super vital, is super critical. And getting involved at the grassroots level, at the lowest hanging fruit level, mentorship, selection committee, joining as a guest speaker, are all vital to making sure that you have strong talent as a company later on down the line.
I think that's we're beginning to just run out of time just a little bit, but I think Janelle's story, and then what Edison had talked about, and then of course what Bob talked about in terms of like this impact that you have, not just on on this kind of socioeconomic impact for everyone, and how it trickles down, and you basically bring an entire community, or bring an entire different people up, right, in terms of like learning about STEM or manufacturing or IT. Really excited about hearing that IT portion from you, Edison. I think is really part of what we're talking about here, is that we are providing the skill sets not necessarily the degree, but the skill sets that people can use to transform not just their lives, but the lives of people around them. I'm not sure if there's anything that you guys, and so I talked about, what were your passion projects right now? And Edison, you talked to me about what those are, but Phil, like, you definitely talked to me about what those are for you. And I just want to make sure, Bob, that if you have a specific, project or something that you're currently working on right now that you want to highlight for the people that are here, I think we'd be really interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, so right now, a huge focus for us is to get a number of life science companies to participate in the development of, again, what I call professional skills domain maps. What are the skills required to have in a particular profession? So the interesting element of this is this would be a collaborative or a cooperative process where multiple companies would provide inputs that in aggregate would say, yeah, this is what it looks like to be in the advanced manufacturing profession within the biotech, biopharm industry. And what are those skills that someone in manufacturing would need to have? Another would be quality assurance, kind of near to my heart. You don't go to college to get a quality assurance degree. Most of the people who are in that profession wind up there sort of by accident, and you pick up stuff along the way, which in the past that was fine, but that's not working today. So sorry, the short answer is the development of professional domain maps, which is the launch point, right, for everything else that we've been talking about. It all starts there. So we're working really hard to try to get as many voices at that employer table as possible, and educators at that table so that they can better understand what they need to be teaching. So it's a pretty ambitious process, but that's where the energy really is right now for us.
Absolutely. I think this has been a really fascinating conversation. I've really loved hearing everything that you, Bob, Phil, and Edison are doing in the community to drive this idea of skills and capabilities versus a degree. I think we have about 9 minutes. So what we'll do, Jake, are we okay with that? With going ahead and trying to open this up to questions? If anyone wants to raise their hand or unmute themselves to ask a question of the panelists, I think now is the time to do that if you have those. Or we can ask more questions of the panelists, or I can ask more questions of the panelists, but really do want to try and open it up to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I'm starting to lose connection here, it seems.
Definitely can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so we did have at least one question I'd seen in the chat from Madeline. She asked, how are regional employers responding to providing paid versus unpaid internships? Maybe you have thoughts on that.
I can take that from Integral's perspective. We try very hard not to do unpaid internships. We actually just started an internship with University of Delaware. They have an internship with them all, a molecular biology internship, and it's one that they say employers can take as unpaid, where the students are with us basically for almost 9 months. And as Integral, we just felt that wasn't something that we could do. These are students who are coming to us, and we treat them just as we treat just our research associates who are entry level people. And so for us at this point, for those kinds of students, we definitely want to be able to pay them for the work that they do. If there are any other employers in the audience that can answer that question, we'd love to hear from you.
If not, Gerald, I saw you had shared some thoughts in the chat. If you'd like to unmute yourself, feel free to share your piece.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I was just I caught y'all late, but however, you know, still talking about the same thing. that we've been talking about for years and years and years. And I just brought up the thing where Mayor Nutter gave every employer and told them this repeatedly all through Philadelphia about they was going to give everybody who would hire an ex-offender who's coming home from prison or whatever, $9,000 to just hire them for a 6-month period. And he had no takers at all. So when we talking about, you know, strengthening the workforce, and we talking about strengthening the educational dynamic for the communities that are left behind or been downwritten, like my community, we see that there's a big discrepancy in getting people who look like me, who've been like me, who are not just people who went to jail one time. We talking about people who went to jail 30, 40, 50 times. You know what I mean? Have extensive criminal records, have extensive drug rehabilitation sets, and these people just don't want them in there. Let's just be plain and honest about it. All right, let's just be plain and honest about it. And we talked about this for years and years, and now I'm starting to hear the talk behind it. And I'm saying I'm going into like a Twilight Zone thing, because I'm like, wow, we talking about this. Are these people listening to us, what we're saying? You know, because we already put out there that we needed somewhat of an educational center. I was already doing coding for years. I was teaching coding for years before the first person you even heard about coding was trying to teach coding. I was trying to teach coding to these kids out here, doing it for free. And now everybody wants to do it, and everybody's trying to do it, but now they don't have the people and they don't want to work with the people. You understand? So it's the difference between, you know, you get your hand-picked people and then you have people who you just don't want to pick. You know what I mean? Because of whatever, you know, circumstance they under at the time. So like right now, and I sent this to Phil and them yesterday, I showed them that there's an alarming rate of young people going to jail right now, all minority owned, Black. They're all Black. And they're going to jail. They're not going to school, okay? They're going to the youth study center that they built. They're going right there. So that's my priority, because I lived there. I lived in that neighborhood that was taken from us, you know, under the most horrendous circumstances through the educational department, through the city. So this is where I'm at with this. I hear the conversation. It sound well. It sound like it's gonna be uplifting. But the actual fact is, will it be? You know what I mean? Because are y'all willing to give somebody a chance who nobody gave a chance to? I think Brother Nawa was on here. Nawa, he's on here. He just came home from doing 32 years in prison, right? He got with me. Brother Nawa had a place to stay from September to now. Brother Nawa is in a 3-story house right now. Not because of nothing I did, it's because of something that we did. We work. We know the work. Y'all guys won't never come to us. Y'all all have a discussion around us about what other people can do through us. Okay, Phil will be the first one to tell you. These innovations that they came up with, they coming straight from the mouth that you hearing now. As we sat down and we talked about it. We talked about them giving up stipends for going to school. We talked about them needing more education for these brothers who coming home, that they can get inside the tech. We talked about the kids learning drones, learning robotics, learning agricultural skills, learning everything that will appease them in their way to progress. Right now, as the Black Bottom Standard right now, we're trying to formulate where we can actually have the kids come on all the off hours. That's after school, that's on the weekends, and that's when they out of school, that's where they can be. The big ticket of it is that all the like whatever they do, play with drones, whatever they do in there will actually go for extra credit when they go back to school. So whatever they do, will go right to extra credit for their school. So now they can have a jump on stuff. You know, they don't have to wait to get no extra credits to do this or do that. They're already doing them. And now they're learning how to work in the workforce younger. You understand? And these brothers and sisters are coming out of jail. You know what I mean? You know, you just can't go up to nobody and tell them that you got a job for them and you let them work for a week or a month and then put them back out in the street. That's not cool. You know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
Absolutely.
You wouldn't like that to happen to you. You know what I mean? So why would you do it to somebody else?
I
And
think that
this is why I talked about if you're gonna do something like that, then you have a long educational period. You say, well, this is gonna take 3 months for you to learn. For you to learn our system. So we're gonna cover you for these 3 months. You know what I mean? Till you learn our system. And then we're gonna get you in. You know what I mean? Nobody touched that $9,000. It's still, you could probably still get it to today. Every employee can probably still get it to today to help their organization out, to help another person out that they don't feel they really need help. And let's just put it like that. You know what I
absolutely.
mean?
Thanks, Gerald. I think that that's one of the things that Phil was talking about is that making sure to like build people through to make to enable them to find full-time employment instead of these kind of short 3 weeks internships. And that's the plan, right? So it's a question of the implementation of that plan and what are the barriers that we have seen in the past to that implementation, and how can we remove those going forward. I think that's part of what this discussion was also about. I think that we have arrived at 1 o'clock. Um, I really appreciate everyone being here today, the insights that were provided by our panelists. And I think, definitely in the chat, there were, people who attended. I know that Edison put down his contact information and some of the things that some of the programs that he is working with that he would want to find partnerships with. So I'm hopeful though that, people have taken that information down so that they can contact Edison specifically about some of the programs, especially this like IT and the manufacturing, which I was really interested in. And also partnering with Bob as well with looking at these kinds of like professional domain maps that he's been talking about with companies as well. And we all know the work that Phil has been doing with the BALL program and working at the Science Center. But I think this was a really productive discussion that we had today. And I'm really very happy and pleased that the panelists were able to be with us and share their insights. I think though that we have reached the end of our time as it was allotted. So